All right, and moving on from there, we're going to go over to Jake from Illinois. Pronouns are he, him. Says that he does believe that evolution is true, but he also thinks that it can coexist with creation. Jake, how are you doing today?
Hello?
Hey, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing?
Hey, awesome. Fantastic. Thank you for waiting for so long. So what we've got
Oh,
here is you said
absolutely.
you do believe in evolution, but you think it can coexist with creation. Is that a good summary of what you were calling for, or did you have anything else you wanted to expound on there?
Yeah, definitely. That's the summary. Yeah, of what I think. So I just want to say, like, I'm not like a believer in like the traditional sense of like where God is like a moral police and he'll send me to hell and all that stuff. But I do think like there's no like I find it hard to believe like the why we can't ask that question like what was there before the Big Bang. Like I've heard you say sometimes on this
Yeah.
show like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But I wonder why that is.
Well, with
And
that one in particular, the reason why it doesn't make any sense is because you're asking what happened before time started. So, like, the Big Bang is it's a kind of a silly misnomer for what actually happened. It sounds like there was an explosion in the middle of somewhere at a certain time, and then all the planets came out of that explosion or something weird like that. But the Big Bang didn't happen at a particular space at a particular time. The Big Bang happened to space and time. Like that is the beginning of those things. So you're asking me what happened
yeah,
outside of everywhere before there was such thing as when. And like that's that doesn't make any sense to ask such a thing. It's outside of the confines of what we understand to be, in our reality. It's like asking what a fourth dimensional cube looks like. It just, what does that even mean?
Yeah. And when it comes to
right.
you saying that the belief in a deity or creator, God of some kind and evolution coexisting, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Um, just because you accept the scientific evidence that we have droves of at this point, right? That says yes, things change, things evolve over time, they kind of fit whatever their environment is. That doesn't actually directly negate the argument that there is a creator God, right? The issue that I
Right.
see is if you start to go very much into those Abrahamic versions of God, you're going to come up with some problems along the way, especially in the history of it, right? Like, how did we all get here? Well, according to this creator God, this is kind of how it happened. If we include evolution with that, that definitely, stops us in our tracks pretty quickly because now we have to answer a lot more difficult questions.
Right. The reason I thought of this is like I was just looking into, those experiments, the Miller experiment and stuff where they, demonstrate in earlier conditions like how these amino acids form from like
Right,
carbon, I
right.
mean from like hydrogen, ammonia and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like there had to be those things to make amino acids. So like I was wondering, okay, maybe and then when I looked more into that they're saying like, okay, because of the Big Bang theory, all these things formed, like helium, hydrogen was the first thing to form,
Mhm.
and then as I go back and like back further, it says like, oh, okay, then like the Big Bang theory just happened. Like there's no like explanation before it, and I was like, why is only that getting a pass and not these these
Yeah.
experiments say that these are the cause for these amino acids to form, like so there's a cause over there, but like for the Big
Mhm.
Bang theory it just gets the pass like because we can never understand it. So and before you say like I'm putting like God of the gaps argument, but there's like that just seems like a good hypothesis, like okay, maybe there was some being, or maybe I don't know if it's supernatural or
Why?
something that
Why?
caused that
Real,
to happen.
real quick, Jake. Why would you say that a supernatural creator of some kind, some creator deity, right? Why is that a better
Right.
explanation than say, this is just what the universe does? What the universe does is it expands outward with a great amount of energy, and all of that energy runs down, and everything that we understand about the universe just basically breaks down. It now becomes essentially this quantum fluctuation field, right? Just this chance of,
Right.
hey, atoms could just pop in and out of existence here. We do have some really good data to indicate our understanding of quantum physics. We're not perfect, right? But why is it a
Right.
better answer to say there is this creator thing as opposed to just saying this may just be what the universe does?
Mm.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not saying like that can't happen, or I'm not saying like, oh, there has to be something that did this, but it just, I don't know, it just seems hard for me to understand like how the probability of that happening, that like the to you know what life forms are today.
Sure.
It's like just started from that single thing, and we don't
Yeah. So
understand much about it. Yeah.
So what you I think the disconnect here is that we don't have the tools to address the question that you're asking. And you're right. It is weird that that should seemingly get a pass. But what I hope you understand is that it really doesn't. It doesn't really get a pass. So like for example, back when Johannes Kepler was doing some of the earliest, our best understandings of astronomy at the time, and he came up with Kepler's laws, which dictated how planets orbit, stars, and like how these things were, how orbital mechanics work. These basics of our understanding of how things work this way. And people took
Mhm.
Kepler's drawing because he showed that it wasn't perfect circles like Copernicus said. It was actually these weird ovals, and depending on the position of the star, that would be more or less elliptical in this orbit. And they showed this to Isaac Newton, and they said, why are orbits elliptical in this way? What's going on with that? And Isaac Newton locked himself in his freaking attic for a month and then came out and said it's actually not an ellipse, it's actually a conic section, it's a slice of a cone. And they were like, how the fuck did you figure that out? And Isaac Newton was like, oh yeah, I invented integral and differential calculus. That's how I found that out. So the dude invented oh yeah, and then he turned 26 after that. Fucking amazing, that guy. Anyway, but like this dude like had to invent a whole new form of math, a new way to calculate infinity, a new way to integrate things
Right.
that we totally didn't understand before, in order to understand something that now you and I pretty much take for granted. We understand, a little bit about how planets orbit stars, and like that's just a thing that happens, and we know what it
Hmm.
was all about. At the time, that was mind blowing. And you would say, well, why is this getting a pass? Because Copernicus said it was a perfect circle that they orbited in. And that was proof of God because it was all these perfect spheres, and then perfect spheres and perfect circles. And then Kepler comes along and is like, fuck you. It doesn't work that way. And so, like, this was this same exact argument over that. So when we look at like the Big Bang, for example, no one's happy that we don't understand how it happened. No one's excited about that.
Right. Yeah.
It burns people up inside. We're trying to figure it out. And indeed, that's what the best telescopes in the world, looking back at the earliest, very beginnings of the universe, trying to understand what's going on. That's the main point of cosmology. But the fact is, we don't understand that question yet, but that doesn't mean we're cool with it. We just haven't invented the right way of asking the question, the right way of testing it. And it may be the case that it's impossible, that there is no way for us to know that. It may be the case, but until proven otherwise, we're going to keep trying. And the question that I think, going back to what Secular was just saying, is that, the what you're doing here, I understand it's not exactly God of the gaps, but you are kind of just plugging in this extra. Well, I guess until anybody says otherwise, I might as well say it's this, and that just isn't necessary. You're talking about the whole saga of the Big Bang up to evolution up to today that you mentioned a minute ago. We know for sure, like based on the observational evidence of the microwave background radiation of like everything we know about the Big Bang. We know how like it started. We know how hydrogen and helium would have gotten started. We know how stars are formed
Hmm.
from those things. We understand the proton-proton
Yeah.
chain that makes heavier elements. We understand how nuclear fusion works. We understand how stars explode. We understand how planets form. We understand how water gets onto planets like ours. We understand how basic inorganic elements, like the ones you mentioned, like all these ammonium and all these things, we understand how they self-assemble because they're the stable state of those things. We understand
Hmm.
how they can form into amino acids all by themselves. We don't quite have 100% grip on how those amino acids are homochiral. That's something that we're a little bit still, we're trying to figure that one out. But we do know for sure that, because we have biotic ways to do that. We don't have an abiotic way to do that yet. But we do have ways that they can form polypeptide chains in microdroplets. So we know how proteins can assemble. We know how lipids can assemble. We know how nucleic acids can work as both catalysts and also as genetic material. We understand everything up to from the Big Bang up to life starting, and we understand how life evolves and how all these things. So we have every piece of the puzzle except for that one. We're still a little bit scratching our heads a little bit on homochirality. But like we have all these pieces, and now we're looking at this one piece, and we're like, okay, well, if we don't understand this, then I guess there must be a God. And it's like, you have to understand, like you are playing by a different set of rules by doing that, and it's better to just continue saying, I don't know, and I hope to know someday, rather than say there might also be this other dimension of supernatural existence where this monster lives. And like that's now a whole bunch of other claims that you have to address, other than just I don't know. Right.
And just to piggyback off of what Forrest was saying, it's in that moment that I find we are truly able to search for the truth. It's in that moment where we genuinely put all of our cards on the table and humble ourselves a little bit and go, shit, we don't know this one. We've tried really hard, but we just don't know.
Yeah.
That is the first step to us truly finding out the answer, because when instead what we do is we put an answer there, but that answer is still really vague, and we still really don't understand that answer because we're fallible humans, right? I mean, we can't possibly know the mind of God, Jake. And so if we just can't possibly understand this all-powerful, all-loving thing, then really at the end of the day, it's not a great answer. It doesn't really give us that satisfaction that you kind of said you were missing out on, which again, Forrest and I are right there with you, man. It'd be so awesome if we had, all of this stuff figured out and you could just go buy a freaking book at the local gas station for $1.99, right? But where we're at is all of the best information that we have answers this question and this question and this question and this question. And this one right here, we don't know. And if we admit that we don't know, that's where we'll start to find the actual answer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. I'm not like closed or anything. And I'm not saying like, this is most likely God or whatever, but it just seems like that is like a hypothesis, maybe, unless they tested it otherwise.
The issue that I have with it is that it's an unnecessary hypothesis, right? Because like every part of this, like we used to think that the universe was eternal, and that's because that was the best. We had no idea of anything otherwise. We had no reason to think that there was a beginning or an end of it. Then Hubble came along, and we started coming up with this idea of the Big Bang, and we were like, okay, this is where the evidence is pointing us. And then as Hubble's constant has become more and more and more refined with more and more data, we're able to really refine. And it went from being, a couple of billion years to, 14 billion years. Actually, it's more close to the 13.8. Now it's like 13.86. And like, we're getting closer and closer and closer to this thing. But every one of those changes was based on evidence. At no point did we say, well, it had to begin, so therefore this is what it must be. And I guess it'll probably be that. You know what I mean? It would just, we always had something to point to. So when you insert a God in there, it may seem like an easy hypothesis that you're asserting, just like, well, I mean, fuck, man, we don't know what it was. Maybe it was this. But what you have to realize is that yours comes with so much more baggage that for me, I can say, I don't know. And the conversation stops because I don't know. And that's all I got. For you to say, maybe it's this, also entails a place for that God to live and a bunch of qualities for that God and a bunch of other things that God may or may not do. A million other questions come out of this one question that you haven't answered. And in science, you should get more questions. When we answer a question, we get a bunch more questions, but we have to answer the first one first. And you have an unanswered question of whether God exists, now creating dozens more questions that go along with it. And you don't even know if it's reasonable to ask those questions because maybe the God doesn't exist. So really, you're creating so much more of a problem for yourself by assuming, even suggesting that this God might be there without evidence for it.
Definitely. No, this is the only thing that I, think about. It rests everything. I don't really feel like, the moral policing or going to hell or any of those things that he's just looking over. So, none of that makes sense to me. It's just like this only thing about like how it started. I was just not very sure, but I think that's a better thing to say. I don't know.
Yeah. And go look into it.
You could be the scientist that figures it out.
Yeah.
Like I'm dead serious. You could be the one to fucking ask because like that's the cool thing about especially modern science. We're getting because of the proliferation of social media and higher education becoming more ubiquitous across the globe. We're getting people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different heuristics in their minds, different ways of thinking, and they're coming up with different answers that we're learning a bunch more cool stuff. More and more people from all around the world are teaching us amazing things that traditional Western thinkers weren't able to come up with. So you, from your background, could be the one to blow this whole thing wide open and teach us something spectacular.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of saying, I don't know.
I recommend starting
with
this one. This is a really cool, it's a introductory astronomy textbook. It's called The Cosmic Perspective. It's by Pearson Learning. I have the 8th edition. You can probably get this it's a loose leaf one because I was poor as shit when I bought it. But you can probably get this one on Amazon for super cheap because it's this is the 8th edition. It's a few years out of date. You can find whatever one, but this is like a introductory textbook for like just community college if you can get through basic algebra, and it shows you what I love about this one in particular. I've learned from this was my textbook when I was taking astronomy. I was getting my education degree, and I've taught out of this as well. And what I love about it is it doesn't just give you bullshit. It doesn't just tell you we know this thing. It actually shows like figures and diagrams, and that's just pure white on the screen there, but it shows you the actual like derivations. Like there's part in here where like it shows like not just how we know that stars make other elements, but it actually does the calculations for you and shows, okay, so there's this much mass of hydrogen produces this many joules of energy, this many protons, this many positrons, this many neutrinos, this many gamma rays, and it diagrams it out and shows the calculations. So like this is great for an introductory learner who wants to get started in this and just knowing the basic about this. Love this book. So again, it's called The Cosmic Perspective. This one's by Bennett, Donahue, Schneider, and Voigt, and it's published by Pearson Learning. And it's awesome. So like that's an easy one. You can check that out, and you can be the scientist to figure this shit out. If that sparks your imagination enough, you will then go on back to school and go learn so much more than I am even qualified to muse upon. I am not an astronomer.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. No, I love biology. I have a biology degree, and then I went to dental school.
Oh, really?
So I'm very interested in science and biology. Yeah.
That's perfect. The way you were speaking about all this stuff, it seemed like you had some sort of handle on it. Like you weren't just some dude who learned some stuff on Wikipedia.
No. I did learn it, but I don't know that much about you. Obviously, you studied biology in detail. That I just studied for prereqs. That's all I did. But I find
that's more than most.
I was gonna say you both have more than I do, so.
Yeah.
Well, then find a better book because that one's like a 1,000 level course. You would be more than fine on getting a higher level one. I didn't realize you of your educational background.
Yeah. I'll definitely look into that still though. It sounds interesting.
Most definitely, man.
Awesome. Thank you.
Also, I always recommend the astrobiology primer, which is something that NASA published. And they publish, I think they have a new one coming out pretty soon, but the newest one, I believe, is version 2. But yeah, the astrobiology primer, it's only like 100 pages long, and you can print this bitch off online. And it also goes into extreme amounts of details on where galaxies come from, where solar system come from, where life comes from, blah, blah, blah. And it may have some even better answers than, anything else.
Sounds good. Yeah, just recently I just started getting into all this stuff, and it's pretty interesting doing that in my free time. Thank you, though. Those are really good resources. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, my pleasure.
Awesome.
Well, Jake, I really appreciate you calling in. Is there anything else you wanted to ask really quickly before we wrapped up?
No, that was it. That was my question. I think you answered in like great detail about like a lot of those things that I was thinking about. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Jake, you're awesome. Thank you so much for waiting online for as long as you did, and thanks so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Bye.
Okay.
That was a really good call. I liked that.
He was awesome.
I liked his
Super
approach.
nice.
Yeah,
Oh,
I just
yeah.
think that's something we should all try to, have more of, right?
Yeah. Just ask more questions and be willing to be okay with, I shouldn't say be okay with I don't know, but like, don't be satisfied with I don't know.
Yeah.
Be okay with it, but don't be satisfied with it.
All right, let's go to our next caller. This is Nicholas from Nebraska, and Nicholas is confused why atheists lump belief in God and everything else. Nicholas, what do you got for me today?
Nick Bravo, I am still here.
Hi. What do you want to talk about?
Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed is that the propensity of when I speak with atheists, they tend to lump everything in with God, like because God doesn't exist, therefore free will doesn't exist, afterlife doesn't exist. It's like they throw everything into this concept of God when atheism simply means there is no God.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you. Those are all independent questions. I think atheists and these discussions often lump them together because a lot of theists put them together, right? There's a lot of like Christians, for example, who believe in God and a soul. And atheists believe in neither of those things typically. Well, by definition, we only don't believe in the God. There are atheists who believe in a soul, right? But I think that's why we traditionally lump them together. But like me, for example, I would be skeptical of both of those claims. And I would address them separately.
I mean, yeah. And I have done, ayahuasca. So, and also I've studied a lot of religion, spirituality, that kind of thing. And my view is more towards Gnosticism. So if you're unfamiliar with that belief system, it's more of the God of the Abrahamic faith, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. He's basically a incompetent, psychopathic entity. And that's part of why the world exists as it does, because he's basically incompetent. And that human beings are actually his superiors. And that's kind of why he treats humanity as he has, because you could read a book like The Apocalypse of Adam, and it shows him to be a complete, torturous, psychopathic criminal. But at the same time, you talk to... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you certainly, with that view, you certainly avoid any problems associated with like the problem of evil, right?
Yeah.
Right, because that would be consistent with your belief.
Well, and then again, I think a lot of what people consider evil is just a difference of perspective. Because, well, for example, there's a difference between a lawbreaker and a criminal. A criminal actually seeks out to hurt people, whereas a lawbreaker, they're abiding by their own morality, which they have to basically make a choice. And I mean, because without free will, without choice, there's no individual sovereignty. But on that flip side, if there's no individual sovereignty, then why bother punishing people because they did something wrong? But slightly back, so if you look at, like, if somebody who breaks the law, people who were hiding Jews during Nazi Germany, yeah, they were breaking the law, but ethically they were good people. They were basically heroes of the time. So they were not criminals. The Nazis were criminals.
Well, I mean, I don't know about I'm not really fussed about these different definitions that you're talking about, like criminal versus lawbreaker or whatever. Like, I don't think personally that I'm concerned at all about the law, except in a practical sense, right? Like I try to do only
Mhm.
what I believe to be moral or like ethically
Yeah.
defensible, and I do that plainly when it is when it goes along with the law, and
Mhm.
I do it subtly
Yeah.
and covertly when it's
Yeah.
not, right? For practical reasons.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
But I have a like I
I've
think
watched.
go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. So I've been watching your show. I've watched a few episodes of your show, and I'm kind of an old school YouTuber. And one of the things that actually pushed me away from atheism was a lot of the hostility of early atheists, such as the Amazing Atheists and all these others, and then um, the individuals calling themselves the Four Horsemen: Harris, Dawkins, Hitchens, Dennett. And one of the things that concerns me is recently I heard Harris having a conversation with Jordan Peterson on a podcast, and they were both agreeing that, number one, there was no such thing as free will, and that, number two, predestination exists. Now, that really made me cringe. Maybe I misheard them both, but it's a little freaky to me because both those are tenets of Calvinism. And if you understand
Of what, sorry?
Calvinism,
Okay.
Calvinism. It was created by a theologian by the name of John Calvin in the Middle Ages.
Mhm.
And he did this for the sole purpose of, well, he did it basically to preserve hierarchy. It's this idea that if you're poor, it's because you upset God and you're going to burn in hell. And if you're
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a
God
distinction
loves
there. I think there's a difference, like particularly in
well, it's just
the
kind of.
fact that, like,
I mean,
I
get
I
it.
don't
Kind of
know, but I think that what Harris is talking about is something that I think a lot of scientists would agree with, which is that what you do is affected by where you've been and what's happened to you in the past, ultimately, and it's a very mechanistic rather than a it's sort of an is rather than an ought statement. And I think the Calvinist position is more of an ought. It's like, this is your station and you ought not fight against it. This is where you belong, sort of thing, right? I think those are different beliefs.
And I definitely agree that the physical universe affects, a human's life, a human's consciousness, etc. But I guess what I'm getting is, I mean, it's like I'm kind of like, I really do want to believe that there's something more out there, and I have had experiences which suggest that. But I also have to lean towards logic, reason, and evidence. And I do consider myself a humanist in that a human supremacist almost, whereas even if there are deities or gods or aliens or whatever the hell else is out there, I do honestly, genuinely believe that humans are superior, and I think part of the problem is religion, because if you believe that you're degenerate, then you're going to some people are going to have a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I hear atheists like Sam Harris kind of perpetuating that, but at the same time, I also hear Christian apologists like Peterson perpetuating it. And I'm kind of concerned because it's either, I'm kind of seeing in history, there's this mentality of it's usually religious authoritarianism or it's atheistic authoritarianism. And I'm kind of concerned because of the way the society is moving. So it's this concern that I have of, are they going to choose to follow God, but then they say they're worthless and do like the Handmaid's Tale, or are they going to move towards some kind of dystopian Chinese, for example, dystopia, where the human is basically stomped under. That famous meme from the book 1984, where it's a boot perpetually smashing the face of the human being. That's what I'm concerned about, because I think we have so much potential, both as individuals and as a species, and yet I don't see either theists or atheists fighting very hard for humans to become anything better. And I'm not talking about you guys specifically, because your show seems to be really good, but it's so frustrating to me, because how do I help people just even within my local sphere to kind of?
I think that there are lots of ways to do that, and you sound like you adhere to a lot of the tenets of humanism, and so there are humanist organizations all over the shop, right? You can get involved with them, but
well, and I'm in Nebraska, so there's not that many. I am planning on moving, but still, it's like, I'm just kind of frustrated, because it's like I don't really see the propaganda is so strong, and at the same time, maybe the face of atheism is changing, because when I first encountered atheism, it was the early 2000s, and these people were so vicious, bitter, hateful, anti-rational.
This is the thing with atheists, is that there is no doctrine, right? So it's like herding cats, and everyone has a different opinion, and like all you can, if you're really interested in advocating your own opinion, then there's lots of ways to get involved, and like even things like starting your own YouTube channel or reaching out on social media, like these are all methods. But I only do these shows, so I'm not even the expert on that. But hey, the only thing that I would want to close out the call with is just to encourage you to think about, I understand what you believe. I want to encourage you to think about why you believe it, and if those reasons are justified to you, and how you justify them.
Okay. And I do realize that I've been a bit scattered, and I do appreciate you taking the time to listen to my call. There's one atheist that I do want to shout out. He's a good friend of mine, really good atheist on YouTube, Agent of Doubt. He is probably the most Christ-like atheist that I have ever met. He's a genuinely good person, and honestly, he's better than most Christians that I've met. Seriously.
Fair enough. Well, thanks for the recommendation, and hey, Nicholas, thanks for the call. We really appreciate it.